Okay, for today's masterclass, I want to talk about something that you may or may not see depending on what's happening in your local parish. But again, we're in this phase, we got just a couple weeks left of it actually, this phase where we're making connections between Old Testament worship and something that we see or might see, I guess in this case, in Catholic worship. And so today I want to talk about veiling in the sanctuary, things in the sanctuary. I know there's also a tradition, a custom of women wearing veils during Mass or in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament. That maybe is for a separate session or a separate series, a separate class. But for now, I want to talk about just veiling of objects in the sanctuary. And again, I think there's actually some really neat connections to be made. But first, before we get into those connections, let's just talk about veiling itself. So when I put a veil over something or in front of something, obviously there's an aspect of that I'm trying to hide it from plain sight. There's something about it that this object or this person maybe it is a person that should not be seen by everyone. I don't want this thing or this person to be seen by everyone as though it's an ordinary object or an ordinary person. There's something special, unique about it. So there's an aspect of veiling, I want to hide it. But there's also the fact of veiling it, it's also revealing something about it. It's revealing that it is special, that it's precious. So I think, again, we want to look at it from this fuller picture, which, yes, is like there's something to be hidden here because maybe not everyone is fit to see it. But alongside of that is that the fact that there is a veil, it reveals that it is something special, something precious. And that's meant to, again, lead me into a deeper reverence for the Mass. It's meant to lead me into a deeper reverence of being in the presence of God and offering Him worship. So when we talk about veiling, typically there are probably like three things that you might see veiled in a Catholic sanctuary. There maybe are more, but I would say the three primary things that you might see veiled in a Catholic sanctuary are the tabernacle, the altar, and the chalice that is used for Mass. And I would say I would break them up into two different groups. One is the tabernacle, and the other are the altar and the chalice themselves, and other sacred objects, I suppose, if there are other sacred objects that are veiled. So first, let's talk about the tabernacle. And in order to talk about the tabernacle, we have to understand the Ark of the Covenant. Again, looking at Jewish worship, what was the heart of the temple, the heart of Israel, ultimately, was the Ark of the Covenant, this box that God commanded Moses to make that was to contain a jar of manna, the miraculous bread from heaven, the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments, and the staff of Aaron, the sign of authority of the high priest, Aaron the high priest. And they put them in this box. And this box then was understood to be like the dwelling place of God on earth. So if you're an Israelite, there's nothing more special than the Ark of the Covenant. It is so sacred, so holy. It is to be in the presence of the Ark is to be in the presence of God Himself. In fact, on top of the Ark, there were these 2 angels, and in between the 2 angels formed a seat called the mercy seat, as though like when the high priest went in to offer worship, it was like the Lord came and sat on the mercy seat. So super holy, super sacred place. And because it was so holy, because it was the dwelling place of God on earth, there were consequences to that. Because in the Old Testament, there is a principle that God reveals ultimately, that nobody can see God face to face and live. And so if that's true, even for like Moses and Elijah, whenever the Lord appears to Moses and Elijah, they don't see His face. I think it's Elijah that sees just his backside, and Moses sees just his feet ultimately. They don't see God face to face, like we might want them to, or we ourselves might want to. Because God is holy, it is there's a veiling of sorts that is meant to conceal His holiness for our protection, ultimately, because He's so holy. Which sounds strange, I know, but that's the reality that is at play. So the Ark of the Covenant, if this is the dwelling place of God, then not just anybody could look at it. In fact, even when it was being transported, before it was in the permanent location of the temple, when it was being transported, the Lord commanded to be cloths to be placed over it, so that as it was being transported, people couldn't just look upon it. And then once it got into the tent of meeting or into the temple itself, it was placed in the heart, the deepest part of the temple called the Holy of Holies. And the Holy of Holies had no light source. It was completely dark. We might see depictions of it that reveal it in light, but the room itself was dark. There were no candles, nothing like that. And the priest would go in, the high priest could go in just one time each year. He would cross over a veil or go through a veil to enter into the Holy of Holies, this dark place. And even then he would burn incense to act as like a further sort of veiling between him and the dwelling place of God. So that was the Ark of the Covenant, this super sacred place that only one person could even be in its presence let alone look upon each year. That's how holy, how sacred it was. For us as Catholics, what is our most sacred thing is the dwelling place of God on earth, which is the tabernacle, where we have the Eucharist, the Holy Eucharist, the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus reserved for us to dwell in his presence. This is something that's a little bit unique. Back then, only one person could go one time each year into the Holy of Holies. Scripture tells us that because of the death and resurrection of Jesus, that veil is torn so that now we have access to God. And so it's not the same sense of like we can't look upon the Lord and live, because actually we know during the Mass that there are a couple of different times where the priest will elevate the Eucharistic host and elevate the chalice to reveal to the people the Lord, and they could look upon him. And we have this great practice of Eucharistic adoration, of being in the presence of Jesus in the Eucharist, exposed for us to look upon and to adore, and he in turn can look upon us. So anyway, we have that reality, but nonetheless, we place a veil on the tabernacle. And again, not everyone necessarily does this, and it's not necessarily required, although I sort of think it is. But anyway, that's not the point. We put a veil on the tabernacle to signify, just like with the veil over the Ark of the Covenant, this is the dwelling place of God. And so it is a place of super sacredness. So too, we put a veil over the tabernacle to reveal this is where Jesus dwells among us, in this tabernacle. And it is a sacred, super sacred place. And so the veil is meant to conceal something about the tabernacle, for sure, but also it is meant to reveal that this is a place of reverence and attentiveness and devotion. So anyway, that's the tabernacle. Okay, now these other objects, the other sacred objects, have a different reason for being veiled. And again, we can go back to the Jerusalem temple. They had all kinds of sacred objects, sacred utensils that were used for their worship. And whenever those things were transported, again, before it was in the temple, I guess, so in the desert, and they would transport them, again, they were veiled with cloths. Why? Because they were sacred objects, and they weren't meant for just people to see in plain sight, but instead they were sacred. And then once they got into the temple, they were in a location that not everyone could go to. Not everyone could go into the court of the priests, or not everyone could go into the holy place. And so again, these things, these objects were holy and sacred, and so they were placed in sacred places where not just everybody could look upon them, but they were reserved for God. And they were made of the best types of material, precious metals, those kinds of things. They were reserved for the glory of God, for him to simply relish in receiving these beautiful items. So the veiling, it wasn't so much to like, cover the presence of God like the veil of the Ark of the Covenant, but it was instead to reveal these are sacred and we want them to be reserved for the Lord. So too, sometimes you'll see this in churches, that there can be an altar or the chalice, the vessel that's used for the precious blood that's, to offer the body and blood of Jesus in the Eucharist on the altar. These are such sacred objects, sacred and holy things, that sometimes you'll see veils put over them to signify their dignity, to signify their holiness. And again, this might seem strange to us because we live in a culture that just loves to see everything. Sometimes we love to see too much of something. We love to see everything, and we sometimes might even insist on seeing everything. But there's this principle at play that not everything really should be seen, because it's not all meant to be seen. It's not all meant for our consumption. Sometimes it's worth it actually to give God something and to let it be for him and for him alone. Just like there are some human actions that are good for people to engage in that are not meant for everybody to look at. So too with the Lord, there are some objects that again, if we're thinking of this like in a natural, practical kind of way, it could be like, well, that's a waste. We spent all this money on this thing, or we spent all this money to make this really look nice. Why don't we get to see it? But if you look at it from that practical way, you're going to kind of drive yourself nuts, because we have all kinds of stuff like that. But if instead you can look at it from this sense of like, no, we want to offer this to God and let it be something beautiful for him, to give him my best without getting anything in return, that's a great sacrifice. And so that might be a reason that you see a veil over your altar, or an altar frontal, or a veil over the chalice. And again, it's not to say that you can't see those things, because during the Mass, the priest will remove the chalice veil and you'll be able to see them. But they point to and signify the holiness of the object, that it is meant to be reserved for sacred worship. So I hope that's helpful for you, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. We've got some more great things to talk about. Peace.